Shock truth when Phyllis realizes that Sally is her long-lost daughter. The reverberations of the DNA disclosure didn't fade with time. They evolved, reshaped, and bedded themselves into the veritably armature of Genoa City's most important families. What had begun as a clinical evidence of biology had converted into a reckoning that tested fidelity, ambition, remission, and identity at every position. In the world of the young and the restless, blood has always carried emblematic power, but this time it carried legal, emotional, and generational consequences that no bone could completely contain. Victor Newman, a man who had erected his conglomerate on foresight and domination, now set up himself navigating strange terrain, motherhood without medication. Though the DNA test left no room for mistrustfulness, accepting the verity needed further than admitting figures on a runner. It needed defying the reality that a piece of his heritage had grown up outside his influence. For a man who valued control above all, that consummation cut deeply. Intimately, Victor reviewed his life with a scrutiny he infrequently allowed himself. He redefined one's connections, assaying timelines, questioning moments he'd long dismissed as insignificant. It wasn't lament that consumed him but an acute mindfulness of missed occasion. Had he known about Matt, he'd have shaped him, defended him, prepared him for the ruthless realities of business and power. Rather, Matt had formed his own worldview, one not molded by Newman prospects. Nikki observed these subtle changes with conservative curiosity. She had witnessed Victor's elaboration before, but this was different. There was lower bluster, smaller duns. When he spoke of Matt, his tone carried commodity close to modesty. Yet Nikki's injuries weren't superficial. Indeed, if Victor had been ignorant of Matt's actuality, the circumstances of his generality represented another chapter of secrets in their long and complicated marriage. Trust, formerly fractured, didn't repair itself overnight. Their exchanges came layered and honest in ways they had avoided for times. Nikki demanded emotional responsibility rather than strategic defense. She asked Victor whether he truly wanted a relationship with Matt, or whether he stressed losing applicability in his own family. Victor bristled at the recrimination but didn't dismiss it outright. He admitted that heritage signified to him, maybe further than it should. Nikki combated that heritage without integrity was concave. Victoria, meanwhile, boosted her alert. In board meetings at Newman Enterprises, she projected stability, icing that stakeholders viewed the company as innocent by particular bull of SMR. Behind unrestricted doors, she reviewed shareholder agreements and race fabrics, seeking clarity on how Matt's acknowledgement might alter legal structures. She refused to allow sentiment to compromise her position. Nick approached the situation else. He sought dialogue rather than defense. He met with Matt informally, no commercial dockets, no pressure, just discussion. They banded knowledge recollections, prospects placed on them, the weight of the Newman name. Nick admitted that being Victor's son was both honor and burden. He advised Matt gently that acceptance into the family came with scrutiny. Matt appreciated the candor. It predicated him in reality without suffocating him. Jack Abbott watched these developments with a complex blend of satisfaction and soul-searching. Exposing the verity had shifted power dynamics, but it had also forced him to examine his own provocations. His contest with Victor had defined decades of conflict. By revealing the DNA results, he'd struck a blow that transcended commercial maneuvering. Yet as he observed Matt's fermentation, Jack questioned whether the collateral damage was lesser than anticipated. Ashley counseled restraint. She reminded Jack that moral palms were fragile if pursued recklessly. The Abbott name, too, carried legacy. However, public perception could shift if Jack appeared to exploit Matt's maternity for strategic gain. In a megacity where reports shaped request confidence, perception was currency. Billy, predictably, saw occasion in every crack within the Newman fort. He pushed for aggressive expansion, using whispers of insecurity. But Jack defied overt exploitation. He claimed that business strategy remained separate from particular disclosure. Indeed, if the lines blurred inescapably, Matt himself stood at a crossroads. The Newman surname offered power, access, and influence. Yet embracing it felt like surrendering autonomy. He spent long gloamings reflecting on his parenting, on the man he believed was his father, on the values inseminated in him. Biology didn't abolish experience. He resolved that any relationship with Victor would be on his terms. When Victor invited Matt to travel Newman Enterprises officially, the visit carried emblematic weight. Directors watched discreetly as father and son walked through corridors lined with pictures and mileposts. Victor spoke of vision and adaptability. Matt heeded but didn't commit. He asked pointed questions about ethics, about commercial responsibility, about the mortal cost of conglomerate structure. Victor, habituated to admiration, set up himself challenged intellectually. Nikki latterly asked Matt how the meeting felt. His answer was simple, inviting. She jounced, understanding that power frequently masked loneliness. In that moment, a fragile bond began forming between them, not defined by contest, but by participated experience navigating Victor's gravitational pull. Intimately, Victor issued another precisely drafted statement affirming Matt's place within the family while emphasizing durability in commercial leadership. It comforted investors but did little to quiet enterprise. Fiscal judges batted implicit heritage scripts. Legal brigades drafted contingency plans. The Newman name, formerly synonymous with certainty, now carried an asterisk. Victoria's countenance faltered compactly during a private battle with Victor. She demanded clarity. Would Matt admit equal standing? Victor assured her that nothing would be decided impulsively. Yet his assurance didn't exclude her fear. She had fought relentlessly for recognition. The prospect of sharing that space unsettled her deeply. Nick tried agreement, prompting his family to see Matt as family rather than trouble. Victoria combated that family and trouble weren't mutually exclusive in their world. The pressure between siblings coddled, subtle but patient. Jack, observing from a distance, honored that the DNA stunner had done further than expose maternity. It had exposed precariousness long buried. Battles stoned, alliances shifted, vulnerabilities surfaced. Genoa City thrived on similar bouleversement. As weeks turned into months, incremental change replaced shock. Matt began attending select family gatherings, cautiously integrating without surrendering independence. Victor admired boundaries further than anticipated, abstained from assessing prospects. Nikki extended warmth without pressure. Victoria maintained professionalism pigmented with reserve. Nick remained the ground between perspectives. Yet beneath the face, ambition still palpitated. Commercial opinions carried undertones of heritage planning. Every success or reversal was interpreted through the lens of race. The question dallied: what part would Matt eventually play? In quieter moments, Victor brazened in strange emotion, query not embedded in competition but in connection. Erecting a conglomerate had been straightforward compared to erecting trust with a son who had grown without him. There were no hostile appropriations for that, no legal strategies, no influence, only tolerance. Jack, too, educated unanticipated soul-searching. Watching Victor navigate vulnerability softened commodity within him. Contest had been comfortable, predictable. This new dynamic complicated the narrative. Jack realized that verity, formally unleashed, evolved beyond the intentions of its revealer. The DNA disclosure had readdressed identity for everyone involved. It challenged hypotheticals about fidelity and power. It underlined that biology, while important, didn't mandate fortune alone. Connections needed trouble beyond inheritable connection. In the ever-evolving drama of the young and the restless, the stunner didn't conclude with a single explosive battle. Rather, it unfolded gradationally, through quiet exchanges, strategic recalibrations, and emotional reckonings. The verity had surfaced, irrevocable and transformative. And in Genoa City, where ambition and affection collide endlessly, that verity would continue shaping opinions for times to come. The pressure in Genoa City was palpable as the week began. At Newman Enterprises, Phyllis closed the door to her office with a decisive click, still trying to calm the storm in her casket. The voicemail she had entered from Sally had replayed in her mind a dozen times since early morning, each renewal tearing her heart open a little more. The words had been simple but ruinous. "Mama, it's me. I've eventually set up you." Phyllis had spent decades wondering, questioning, condemning herself, and stewing the unknown. Memories long buried: the sanitarium room where she had given up her baby, the guilt-laden exchanges with her parents, the rumored regrets she had no way raised, now surged back with intimidating clarity. She could see the bitsy fritters, the soft cries, the nanny gently handing her down, averring she couldn't stay. And now, decades latterly, her son was then alive, staying, and wanting her. Phyllis felt the walls of her office close in. She sank into her president, shaking, as the weight of lost time pressed down like a physical force. She allowed. Of the birthdays she had missed, the academy plays she had no way attended, the ladders and mileposts she'd no way get back. Her casket tensed, and gashes gouged her eyes, hot and grim. She rumored Sally's name as if saying it audibly could ever bridge the decades of absence. Meanwhile, across city at Crimson Lights, Sally sat nervously at her usual corner table. Her fritters wrapped around a mug of coffee, tapping rhythmically against the ceramic. She had rehearsed what she'd say 1,000 times, but now that the moment was imminent, words felt brittle and fragile. Sally's studies drifted to her own life, the struggles, the triumphs, the moments when she had endured for a mama she slightly knew. And yet, despite all the hurt and resentment that dallied from the history, a flicker of stopgap palpitated within her. She'd eventually know her mama. She'd eventually be seen, understood, and embraced, or rejected. Across the road, Victor Newman was pacing his office, half hearkening to a conference call, half fussing about the unforeseen flurry of exertion girding Newman Enterprises. "Phyllis," he barked at his adjunct when she popped her head in. "Has she said anything yet?" His tone was intolerant, nearly uncharacteristically vulnerable. Victor had always known Phyllis' secrets ran deep, but the study that she might be reconnecting with a long-misplaced son struck him in a place he wasn't ready to admit. At the Abbott manse, Nikki Newman was belting tea still, ignorant that her friend's world was about to be turned upside down. She'd soon find herself caught in the emotional whirlpool that the Phyllis-Sally reunion promised to unleash, with commitment tested and alliances questioned. Back at Newman Enterprises, Phyllis had eventually steeled herself and picked up her phone. She telephoned Sally's number with pulsing fritters, each ring a shower of expectation, fear, and stopgap. "Hello," came the familiar, warm, and slightly nervous voice on the other end. "Hi Sally," Phyllis rumored, her voice cracking. It's me, Phyllis." A pause, long and fraught, before Sally spoke. Mama, the single word was loaded with times of craving, hurt, and conservative sanguinity. Gashes streamed down Phyllis' face. Yes, it's me. I can't believe I'm hearing you say that." The two women's discussion began haltingly, stilted at first, as if decades of silence had created a flume too vast to cross in a single call. But sluggishly, the walls began to deteriorate. They spoke of lost time, of what could have been, of fears and regrets. Phyllis tried to apologize for times she had no way been there, and Sally, unexpectedly, met her with tolerance and a desire to understand, rather than wrathfulness. Away, Adam Newman was watching the news content of Genoa City buzzing with enterprise over the Newman family drama. "So Phyllis has a son?" he murmured to himself, a blend of curiosity and colluding glinting in his eyes. "Intriguing." Adam incontinently began allowing about how this disclosure could be abused. He knew the Newman family's dynamics like no bone. Differently, and any shift in Phyllis' position or emotional state could have ripple goods across the board. At the Grand Phoenix Hotel, Chelsea and Nick were having their own discussion. "Did you hear about Phyllis?" Chelsea asked, her brow furrowed. "Supposedly, she's reconnecting with a son she's no way met. Can you imagine?" Nick shook his head. "Only in Genoa City would commodity like this be. But good for her, I guess. Perhaps she eventually gets the check she's demanded." Meanwhile, Victor was conniving behind the scenes. He knew the power of secrets, and he understood that Sally's appearance could either be an occasion or a trouble. He tapped his fritters on the office, calculating how to keep his family complete while also controlling the narrative. At Newman Enterprises, the moment of reunion eventually arrived. Phyllis had invited Sally to the office under the rationale of a business meeting, but both women knew the verity this was about further than business. As Sally walked in, her heart racing, Phyllis stood, reluctant, uncertain, yet hopeless. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, taking in the resemblance, the familiar gestures, the echoes of times lost. Also, sluggishly, Gashes broke the levee. Phyllis rushed forward, and Sally stepped into her arms. The grasp was fierce, critical, and fraught with all the emotion of decades of separation. "I can't believe it's really you," Phyllis muttered against Sally's hair. I allowed. I'd no way see you again." Sally pulled back slightly, looking up into her murmurous eyes. "I know, Mom. I've waited so long for this moment. But I demanded to find you on my own terms." Phyllis felt a swell of pride, relief, and guilt all at formally. She wanted to explain, to justify, to apologize, but words failed her. Rather, she simply held her son, letting the silence speak volumes. And in Genoa City, the news began to spread like campfire. At Crimson Lights, whispers turned into exchanges turned into gossip, and gossip turned into enterprise. Everyone had their opinion. Was Sally a long-misplaced Newman heir at law? Was Phyllis hiding commodity differently? Could this affect Victor, Nikki, Adam, or indeed the business? Across city, Sharon Collins caught wind of the news and rushed to check on Phyllis. "Are you okay?" Sharon asked, concern etched across her face. Phyllis jounced, gashes still glistering, and gave her friend a shaky smile. It's inviting, Sharon. But it's real. She's real." Meanwhile, Victoria Newman was conniving her coming move. She had always kept an eye on her mammy's influence in the family, and the disclosure of a son who could potentially inherit or disrupt Newman Enterprises made Victoria's mind race. The pressure, the drama, the emotional complexity, this was classic Young and Restless. Over the coming days, Phyllis and Sally navigated the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. Exchanges were concentrated with vulnerability and occasional conflict, as times of absence and misreading surfaced. Phyllis plodded with guilt, while Sally plodded with trust. But sluggishly, their bond grew. The week capped with a family regale at the Newman manse. Victor and Nikki watched precisely, noting the subtle relations between Mama and son, assaying how this disclosure might alter commitment and power dynamics. Adam, always calculating, observed for openings, while Victoria quietly fumed, realizing that her influence might be hovered. By the end of the week, Phyllis and Sally had taken conditional way toward conciliation. The road ahead was long, filled with obstacles, family pressure, and the ever-present shadow of Genoa City drama, but the spark of Mama-son connection had eventually been lit. And in true Young and Restless fashion, the homestretch of the week ended on a thriller. Sally entered an anonymous note intimating that someone in Genoa City knew further about her history than she had ever realized, leaving observers hopeless for coming weeks' explosive exposures. Sally herself felt both excitement and fear. She walked into Newman Enterprises with her phone gripped tightly, heart racing. Every step toward Phyllis' office felt like stepping into a time machine, the weight of decades pressing against her shoulders. She glanced at the familiar totem of Newman Enterprises on the wall, and recollections of her own uncertain history, the foster homes, the questions unanswered, the nights spent wondering, all swirled in her mind. This was it, the moment she had been staying for. Inside, Phyllis was pacing, floundering to compose herself. She had formally rehearsed what she'd say, but as the moment drew near, all her rehearsed words fled. What could she say that would adequately make up for 20 commodity times lost? What words could abolish the guilt, the grief, the fear of rejection? She heard steps in the hallway, and her palpitation quickened. Sally knocked vocally, and Phyllis called out, "Come in." The moment Sally stepped into the room, time sounded to decelerate. Phyllis noticed the familiar cock of her son's head, the spark of her eyes that imaged her own, the subtle expressions that spoke of the same disposition, the same determination. She wanted to speak, to reach out, but words failed her. Sally, seeing her murmurous vacillation, took a conditional step forward. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice steady but pigmented with emotion. Phyllis swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Hi, Sally," she rumored, voice cracking. It's really you. I've awaited my whole life to hear that word." The two women goggled at each other, absorbing decades of absence and craving in a single regard. Also, nearly artificially, Phyllis opened her arms. Sally dithered only a moment before stepping into the grasp, and the clinch they participated was fierce, full of the pressure, relief, and craving that had been erecting for times. "I'm sorry," Phyllis rumored, her voice muffled against Sally's shoulder. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you, for everything." Sally pulled back slightly, her eyes shimmering. I know, Mom. I've allowed about you every day. I demanded to find you for myself, on my own terms. But now I'm then." Phyllis' gashes fell freely. "And I'm so glad you are. So glad." Meanwhile, in the Newman manse, Victor was formally apprehensive that Commodity Monumental was unfolding. He was pacing, murmuring to himself as he tried to anticipate how this would affect the family.